The old grandfather clock in the Martinez hallway chimed 11 times as 3-year-old Emma pressed her face against the cold bedroom window. Outside, the November storm raged with unprecedented fury, turning the quiet suburban street into a watercolor painting of streaking rain and blurred streetlights. Thunder rolled across the sky like an angry giant, but it wasn't the storm that kept Emma awake. It was the voices downstairs that had been growing louder and more frightening with each passing hour. Emma clutched her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, tighter against her small chest. The brown bear with one missing eye had been her constant companion since she could remember, a gift from her mother on her 2nd birthday. Tonight, even Mr. Buttons' familiar comfort couldn't chase away the fear that crept up her spine like ice-cold fingers. "You can't leave me, Maria." Her father's voice boomed through the house, carrying a desperation Emma had never heard before. The sound made her stomach feel funny, the same way it did when she went too high on the playground swing. "I won't let you take her away from me." Emma knew they were talking about her. Grown-ups always thought she didn't understand, but she understood more than they realized. For weeks, she had sensed the tension between her parents, felt it in the way her mother's hugs lasted longer than usual, noticed how her father's smile didn't reach his eyes anymore during dinner. Her mother had been packing a suitcase that afternoon, whispering into the phone when she thought Emma was napping. "Miguel, you're scaring me," came her mother's voice, trembling like a leaf in the wind. Maria Martinez had always been the gentle one, the one who sang lullabies in Spanish and made pancakes shaped like butterflies on Sunday mornings. But tonight, her voice carried a fear that made Emma's little heart race. Lightning illuminated Emma's bedroom in stark white, revealing her scattered toys and the picture she had drawn for her mother earlier, a crayon masterpiece of 3 stick figures under a rainbow. She had been so proud when she showed it to her mother, who had smiled and said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Now, listening to the angry voices below, Emma wondered if they would ever be those 3 happy stick figures again. "Please, Miguel, think about Emma," her mother pleaded. "She doesn't need to see us like this. Let me take her to my mother's for a few days, just until we can figure this out." Nitrogen monoxide. The word exploded from her father like a gunshot, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. Emma jumped, her small body trembling as she pressed herself closer to the window. Mr. Buttons seemed to understand her fear, his button eyes staring back at her with silent comfort. The house fell into an eerie quiet that was somehow worse than the shouting. Emma strained her ears, hoping to hear her mother's voice, hoping for the familiar sound of her humming the Spanish lullaby she sang every night. Instead, there was only silence, broken occasionally by strange scraping sounds and her father's heavy footsteps moving around the house. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as Emma waited by the window. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, but her legs had gone numb, and the storm outside had begun to calm when she saw movement in the backyard. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched her father emerge from the back door, dragging something large wrapped in what looked like her mother's favorite blue blanket, the one she used when reading bedtime stories. Emma's breath fogged the window as she leaned closer, trying to understand what she was seeing. Her father struggled with his burden, pulling it across the muddy lawn toward the old wooden shed where he kept his tools. The shovel, Emma noticed with the sharp observation that only children possess, was in his other hand. She had seen that shovel many times before when her father worked in the garden, planting the roses that her mother loved so much. But this was different. This was wrong. Even at 3 years old, Emma knew that people weren't supposed to drag heavy things to the shed in the middle of scary storms. People weren't supposed to look the way her father looked, wild and frantic, constantly checking over his shoulder as if someone might be watching. The little girl pressed her face harder against the glass, her small hands leaving palm prints on the cold surface. She watched as her father disappeared behind the shed, heard the distant sound of metal hitting earth, and felt something break inside her chest. Mr. Buttons absorbed her silent tears as she continued her vigil, some instinct telling her that whatever was happening down there was the kind of secret that changed everything forever. When dawn finally crept across the horizon, painting the storm-washed neighborhood in soft pastels, Emma was still at her window. Her father had gone back into the house hours ago, and she had heard him moving around, opening and closing doors, running water in the kitchen sink. But she hadn't heard her mother's voice, hadn't heard her morning routine of starting coffee and humming while she prepared breakfast. The sound of sirens in the distance made Emma's heart jump. 2 police cars pulled into their driveway. There, red and blue lights painting the wet pavement in alternating colors. Officers in dark uniforms stepped out, their faces serious as they approached the front door. Emma heard her father answer, his voice different now, higher, nervous, nothing like the angry roar from the night before. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," he said, and Emma could hear the tears in his voice. "My wife, she's missing. I woke up this morning, and she was just gone." As the adults talked downstairs, Emma made a decision that would haunt her for months to come. She closed her eyes, pulled Mr. Buttons closer, and made herself forget. She made herself forget the angry voices, the crashing sounds, the sight of her father with the shovel and the blue blanket. Some truths, her 3-year-old mind decided, were too big and too scary for little girls to carry. From that moment forward, Emma Martinez stopped speaking entirely, locking away the terrible secret of that stormy night where only she could find it. Detective Sarah Williams sat in her cluttered office at 2:47 a.m., surrounded by crime scene photos, witness statements, and cold cups of coffee that had long since lost their warmth. The Maria Martinez case file lay open before her like an accusation, its contents scattered across her desk in a desperate attempt to find the one piece of evidence that would crack the investigation wide open. 6 months had passed since Maria's disappearance, and Sarah felt the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows across the photographs of Maria Martinez, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile that seemed to light up every picture. In her wedding photo, she gazed lovingly at Miguel Martinez, her hand resting on her swollen belly where Emma was growing. It was impossible to reconcile that image of happiness with the grim reality that had unfolded in their suburban home. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and picked up the timeline she had reconstructed dozens of times. November 15th, 11:30 p.m. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices from the Martinez residence. Mrs. Chon from next door had called it the worst fight yet, but when pressed for details, she admitted she couldn't make out specific words through the walls. 12:45 the arguing stopped abruptly, replaced by what Mr. Peterson from across the street described as scraping and banging sounds that lasted for nearly 2 hours. The detective's phone buzzed with a text from her partner, Detective Mike. "Rodriguez, any luck with the security footage from the hardware store?" Sarah grimaced at the message. They had spent weeks tracking down every possible lead, following Miguel's alibi like bloodhounds. He claimed he had been working late at his construction office, but the security cameras showed significant gaps in his timeline. From 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., there was no record of him anywhere, not at work, not at any of the nearby establishments, nowhere. Miguel Martinez had been their primary suspect from day one, but being suspicious and proving guilt were two entirely different things. The man was clever, Sarah had to admit grudgingly. He had reported Maria missing at exactly 6:47 a.m., calling 911 in a voice that trembled with what seemed like genuine panic. "My wife is gone," he had sobbed into the phone. "She was here when I left for work, and now she's just vanished. Her car is still here. Her purse, everything. Something terrible has happened." Sarah pulled up the recording of that 911 call for the 100th time, listening carefully to every inflection in Miguel's voice. To untrained ears, he sounded like a distraught husband. But Sarah had been a detective for 15 years, and she knew the difference between genuine grief and performance. There was something too practiced about his delivery, too many perfectly timed pauses and carefully modulated sobs. The physical evidence had been frustratingly sparse. Crime scene technicians had gone through the Martinez house with microscopes, searching for blood, signs of struggle, anything that might indicate violence had occurred. They found nothing conclusive. The house was spotless, almost suspiciously so. The kitchen showed signs of recent deep cleaning, with faint traces of bleach still lingering in the air when officers first arrived. Miguel explained it away easily. Maria was always cleaning. She was obsessive about keeping things perfect. But it was the absence of evidence that troubled Sarah most. No suicide note, no indication that Maria had planned to leave voluntarily, no activity on her credit cards or cell phone. The woman had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only her silent daughter and a husband whose story had more holes than Swiss cheese. Emma Martinez was the key to everything. Sarah knew it in her bones. The 3-year-old had been present in the house that night, yet she hadn't spoken a single word since her mother's disappearance. Child Protective Services had initially placed her with a maternal grandmother, Rosa Martinez, but the kind woman was in her 70s and struggling with her own grief. Emma had been bounced between foster homes and temporary arrangements, her trauma deepening with each move. Sarah had tried everything to reach the child. She had brought in child psychologists, art therapists, even a specialist in childhood trauma from the State University. Dr. Patricia Hoffman had spent hours with Emma, using play therapy and gentle questioning techniques, but the little girl remained locked in her protective silence. "She's not ready," Dr. Hoffman had explained. "The trauma is too fresh, too overwhelming. Pushing her now could cause permanent psychological damage." The detective picked up a drawing Emma had made during one of their sessions, stick figures in crayon that Dr. Hoffman had interpreted as potentially significant. 3 figures stood under what might have been a rainbow: a large figure, a medium figure, and a tiny figure with pigtails. But when asked about the drawing, Emma had simply stared at the paper with hollow eyes and returned to her coloring. Miguel had visitation rights, of course. Legally, he was still Emma's father, and no charges had been filed. Sarah had watched him during those supervised visits, noting how Emma would shrink away from his touch, how she would press herself against the far wall of the visitation room. The child's body language screamed fear, but fear wasn't evidence that would hold up in court. The case had attracted media attention. Initially, Young Mother Vanishes Without a Trace had been featured on several true crime podcasts and local news segments. But as months passed without new developments, public interest waned. Sarah's superiors were pressuring her to move on to more solvable cases, to stop obsessing over what they increasingly saw as a dead end. But Sarah couldn't let go. She had joined law enforcement to be a voice for the voiceless, to seek justice for those who couldn't seek it for themselves. Maria Martinez deserved justice, and somewhere in that traumatized little girl's mind lay the truth that could provide it. Late that night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She reached for her phone and dialed Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist she had heard speak at a conference about innovative therapeutic approaches. Dr. Foster had mentioned something intriguing: a therapy dog program that was showing remarkable results with traumatized children who couldn't or wouldn't speak. "Dr. Foster," Sarah said when the call was answered, "I have a case that might interest you." It involves a 3-year-old witness who holds the key to solving her mother's disappearance. Tell me about this therapy dog of yours. Dr. Amanda Foster adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses as she reviewed Emma Martinez's file one final time before the session. The child's case notes painted a heartbreaking picture: selective mutism following severe trauma, multiple placement disruptions, and a complete withdrawal from human interaction. In her 20 years of practice, Dr. Foster had seen many children retreat into protective silence, but Emma's case felt different, more profound, more disparate. The therapy room at Children's Services had been carefully prepared for this unprecedented meeting. Soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence. Comfortable cushions were scattered across the floor, and toys specifically chosen for their non-threatening nature filled the space. Dr. Foster had learned that traumatized children responded better to environments that felt safe and controlled, unlike the chaos they had experienced. Detective Williams stood nervously by the window, watching the parking lot for any sign of Rex and his handler. She had spent the previous week reading everything she could find about animal-assisted therapy, desperately hoping this unconventional approach might succeed where traditional methods had failed. The department's skeptical glances hadn't escaped her notice. Many of her colleagues thought she was grasping at straws, but Sarah's instincts told her this was their last, best hope. Emma sat in the corner of the room, precisely where she positioned herself during every session. Her small frame seemed even tinier against the oversized chair, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face as she methodically colored in a coloring book. The picture was of a house with 3 windows. Emma always chose the same image, always colored it with the same careful precision, never venturing outside the lines. Dr. Foster had noted that the child's art had become increasingly rigid and controlled since the trauma, as if she was trying to impose order on a world that had become terrifyingly unpredictable. The sound of paws clicking against linoleum in the hallway announced Rex's arrival before anyone saw him. Emma's head lifted slightly, her coloring suspended mid-stroke. It was the first time in months that anything had interrupted her compulsive drawing routine. Dr. Foster exchanged a meaningful glance with Detective Williams. This reaction alone was progress. Officer Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Emma's family, entered first, her uniform modified to appear less intimidating. She had worked with Rex for 3 years, and together they had helped dozens of children find their voices in courtrooms across the state. Rex followed quietly beside her, his golden coat gleaming under the soft lights, his intelligent brown eyes immediately scanning the room to assess the emotional temperature of its occupants. Rex was a 4-year-old golden retriever who had been specifically trained for therapy work from puppyhood. Unlike service dogs, who performed specific tasks for their handlers, Rex's job was more nuanced. He was trained to read human emotions, to provide comfort without being overwhelming, and to remain calm in even the most emotionally charged situations. His temperament had been carefully selected, gentle enough for the most fragile children, yet steady enough to handle courtroom stress. Emma's reaction was immediate and profound. She set down her crayon, the first time anyone had seen her willingly, stopped coloring and stared at Rex with wide, curious eyes. The dog, sensing her interest, sat down about 10 feet away and simply waited. This was part of his training. Never approach a traumatized child directly, but make himself available for interaction on their terms. For several minutes, the room held its breath. Dr. Foster had briefed everyone that the initial introduction was crucial. Any pressure or forced interaction could undo weeks of potential progress. Emma studied Rex with the intense concentration she usually reserved for her coloring, as if trying to determine whether this new presence was safe or threatening. Slowly, so slowly that the adults barely noticed at first, Emma began to shift. In her chair, her body language, which had been closed and defensive for months, started to open slightly. She uncrossed her arms, straightened her posture, and leaned forward just a fraction of an inch. Rex, with the intuition that made him exceptional at his job, responded by lying down, making himself even less threatening while maintaining eye contact. "Hello, beautiful boy," Emma whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. The adults in the room froze, afraid that any movement might break the spell. These were the first words Emma had spoken since the night of her mother's disappearance, and they were directed not to any of the caring professionals who had been trying to reach her, but to a dog who asked nothing of her except acceptance. Rex's tail gave the slightest wag, just enough to acknowledge her greeting without appearing overly excited. His training had taught him to mirror the energy level of the children he worked with. Exuberant responses could frighten traumatized kids, while complete stillness might seem rejecting. Emma slid off her chair and took a tentative step toward Rex, then another. Each movement was careful, considered, as if she was approaching something precious that might disappear if she moved too quickly. When she was close enough to touch him, she stopped and extended her small hand, palm up, the way her mother had taught her to greet new dogs. Rex sniffed her hand gently, then looked up at her with those warm brown eyes that seemed to convey understanding beyond words. Emma's face, which had been a mask of careful blankness for months, began to show the first hints of genuine expression. The corners of her mouth turned up slightly, not quite a smile, but something approaching it. "He likes me," she whispered to herself, the wonder in her voice breaking Dr. Foster's heart. It was as if Emma had forgotten that she could be liked, that she was worthy of gentle attention and unconditional acceptance. Officer Martinez spoke quietly from her position near the door. "Rex likes everyone, but he especially likes brave girls who know how to be gentle with animals." Emma looked up at her, really looked at her, for the first time since entering the room. "I'm Emma," the little girl said, her voice still barely above a whisper, but growing stronger. She was speaking to Rex, but her words were clearly meant for the human who belonged to him as well. Dr. Foster felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Emma carefully stroke Rex's golden fur. The child's touch was reverent, as if she was petting something magical. For his part, Rex remained perfectly still, allowing Emma to control the pace and intensity of their interaction. "He's soft," Emma murmured, and for the first time in months, there was something approaching joy in her voice. "He's not scary, like—" She stopped abruptly, the light in her eyes dimming as she remembered she wasn't supposed to talk about scary things. But the seed had been planted. Rex had accomplished in 10 minutes what months of traditional therapy had failed to achieve. He had given Emma a reason to use her voice again. 3 weeks had passed since Rex first entered Emma's world, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The sterile therapy room at Children's Services had become a sanctuary where a broken little girl slowly began to piece herself back together, one whispered word at a time. Dr. Amanda Foster arrived early each morning, reviewing her notes and adjusting her approach based on Emma's progress, while Detective Williams watched from behind one-way glass, hoping desperately for the breakthrough that would give Maria Martinez the justice she deserved. Emma's sessions with Rex had developed a routine that spoke to her deep need for predictability and control. She would enter the room clutching Mr. Buttons, her faithful teddy bear, and immediately seek out Rex, who waited patiently in the same spot each time. The dog had become her anchor in a world that had tilted dangerously off its axis that terrible November night. Unlike the adults who asked questions and expected answers, Rex simply existed in her space, offering unconditional acceptance and the kind of steady presence that traumatized children craved. Dr. Foster learned to position herself strategically during these sessions, close enough to observe, but far enough away that Emma felt safe to interact naturally with Rex. The child's behavior patterns had become increasingly clear. She would spend the first 10 minutes of each session simply reconnecting with Rex, stroking his golden fur and whispering greetings that grew more elaborate each day. Then, as her comfort level increased, she would begin to share fragments of her inner world, not with the adults in the room, but with the gentle dog who listened without judgment. "Rex, do you like butterflies?" Emma had asked during their second week together, her small hand tracing patterns in his fur. Mommy used to make pancakes that looked like butterflies. She said they were magic pancakes that could make any sad day better. Dr. Foster had noted this reference to her mother, in the past tense significant progress from Emma's earlier insistence that Mommy went away, but she's coming back soon. The breakthrough Dr. Foster had been hoping for came during their 15th session together. Emma had been particularly quiet that day, more withdrawn than usual. She had experienced a difficult visit with her father the previous afternoon, one of the court-mandated supervised visits that left her pale and shaking. Miguel Martinez continued to maintain his innocence, playing the role of the grieving husband and concerned father, but Emma's reaction to his presence spoke volumes about the truth hidden in her traumatized mind. That Tuesday morning, Emma curled up against Rex's side in a way she had never done before, pressing her face against his warm fur as if seeking comfort from a terrible memory. Dr. Foster held her breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Detective Williams, watching from the observation room, leaned forward in her chair, every muscle tense with anticipation. "Rex," Emma whispered, her voice so soft that Dr. Foster had to strain to hear it. "Can I tell you a secret? A really big secret that I'm not supposed to tell anyone?" The dog's tail gave the slightest wag, encouraging her to continue. "Daddy said bad things happen to little girls who tell secrets. He said if I ever told anyone what happened on the scary night, the same thing that happened to Mommy would happen to me." Dr. Foster's heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. Any movement, any sound that indicated the adults were listening could cause Emma to retreat back into her protective silence. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the crack in the wall that Emma had built around her traumatic memories. "But you're not a person, are you, Rex?" Emma continued, her small fingers twisted in his fur. "You're my special friend, and special friends keep secrets safe." She was quiet for a long moment, gathering courage from Rex's steady breathing and warm presence. On the night when the sky was angry and making loud noises, Mommy and Daddy were making loud noises too. Loud, scary noises that made my tummy feel funny. Emma's voice grew even softer, forcing Dr. Foster to lean forward slightly to catch her words. Mommy was wearing her pretty blue nightgown, the one with the flowers that she said came from angels. She was putting clothes in a big bag because she said we were going to go see Grandma Rosa for a while. But Daddy got really, really mad about the bag. The little girl paused, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow as the memory surfaced. Rex seemed to sense her distress and shifted slightly, pressing closer to her small body in a gesture of comfort and protection. His presence gave Emma the strength to continue her heartbreaking testimony. "Daddy yelled at Mommy with words I'm not allowed to say," she whispered. Then he picked up the heavy thing from the garage, the thing he uses to fix the car sometimes. It was shiny and cold-looking. Mommy said, "Please, Miguel, think about Emma," but Daddy didn't listen. He hit Mommy with the heavy thing, and she fell down really hard and didn't get up anymore. Dr. Foster's hands were shaking as she took notes, trying to capture every word of Emma's devastating account. The heavy thing from the garage was likely a wrench or similar tool, something that would explain the blunt force trauma that had undoubtedly killed Maria Martinez. The detail about the blue nightgown matched the clothing found on the remains, a fact that had never been released to the public. After Mommy stopped moving, Daddy wrapped her up in her favorite blanket, the blue one with the soft fuzzy stuff that she used when we read stories together, Emma continued, her voice taking on a dreamlike quality as she retreated deeper into the traumatic memory. He dragged her outside, where the rain was falling really hard. I watched from my window because I was scared to go downstairs. Emma's next words sent chills down Dr. Foster's spine. Daddy took Mommy to the wooden house in the backyard where he keeps his tools and the big shovel. I could hear the shovel hitting the ground, even with all the rain and thunder. He was digging a hole behind the shed, where Mommy planted the pretty flowers last spring. The pink and yellow ones that smell like heaven. The session continued for another 20 minutes, with Emma providing details that only someone who had witnessed the crime could know. She described the sound of metal hitting earth, the way her father had looked around nervously while working, and how he had come back into the house hours later, his clothes muddy and his hands dirty. Most damning of all was Emma's final revelation. The next morning, when the police cars came with the pretty lights, Daddy told me to never, ever tell anyone what I saw. He said if I told, the bad man would come for me too, and I would disappear just like Mommy. Emma looked up at Rex with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 3-year-old. But you'll keep me safe, won't you, Rex? You won't let the bad man take me away? As the session ended, and Emma was gently guided to her next activity, Dr. Foster and Detective Williams knew that everything had changed. Emma's whispered confession to a therapy dog had provided them with the key to solving Maria Martinez's murder. Now came the challenging task of helping Emma find the courage to share her terrible secret with a courtroom full of strangers and ensuring that her father would finally face justice for his heinous crime. The warrant arrived at Detective Sarah Williams' desk at 5:43 a.m. on a gray Tuesday morning, its official seal still warm from the judge's stamp. Judge Patricia Henley had been initially skeptical about issuing a search warrant based on the whispered testimony of a 3-year-old to a therapy dog, but Dr. Foster's detailed documentation and the specific corroborating details Emma had provided ultimately convinced her. The child's account contained information that had never been released. To the public, details only the killer could know. Sarah stared at the legal document in her hands, feeling the weight of 6 months of frustration and determination finally crystallizing into action. This was it, their one chance to find Maria Martinez and bring her killer to justice. If Emma's traumatized memories were accurate, they would find Maria's remains exactly where the little girl had described, behind the wooden shed, beneath the flower garden that Miguel had so carefully tended in the months following his wife's disappearance. The tactical team assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, their breath visible in the cold air as they reviewed the search plan one final time. Captain Rodriguez had assigned 8 officers to the operation, understanding that this case had captured not only the department's attention, but also significant media interest. News vans were already positioned at the perimeter of the Martinez property, their reporters eager to document what could be the breakthrough in a case that had captivated the local community. Miguel Martinez's house stood quiet and ordinary. In the early morning light, its neat suburban facade giving no hint of the horror that allegedly lay buried in its backyard. The white picket fence that Maria had painted just months before her disappearance still gleamed with fresh paint, and the garden gnomes she had collected continued their cheerful vigil over the precisely manicured lawn. It was the kind of house that appeared in real estate magazines, the embodiment of the American dream-making, the evil it concealed all the more chilling. At 6:15 a.m., Detective Williams rang the doorbell, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Miguel answered. The door in his bathrobe, his hair disheveled from sleep, playing the part of the innocent man disturbed by an unexpected visit. His performance was flawless, the confused expression, the concerned tone as he asked what was wrong, the way his eyes widened with apparent shock when Sarah presented the search warrant. "I don't understand," Miguel said, his voice cracking, with what sounded like genuine bewilderment. "You want to search my property? For what?" I've cooperated with every aspect of this investigation. I've answered every question, submitted to polygraph tests, given you access to everything you've requested." His hands trembled slightly as he read the warrant, and Sarah found herself momentarily doubting Emma's account. Miguel's reaction seemed so authentic, so perfectly calibrated to innocence. But then she remembered Emma's words to Rex. "Daddy said bad things happen to little girls who tell secrets." She thought of the child's terror during supervised visits, the way Emma would press herself against the wall whenever her father entered the room. Children didn't lie about their fear. Their bodies betrayed truth, even when their words failed them. The excavation began at 7 a.m. sharp. Sarah had specifically requested that Miguel be allowed to remain on the property during the search, despite his lawyer's protests. She wanted to watch his face, to study his reactions as the team worked methodically through his backyard paradise. If he was innocent, he would be confused, angry, demanding answers. If he was guilty, the mask would eventually slip. Emma had described the location with heartbreaking precision. Behind the big wooden house where Daddy keeps his tools, under the pretty flowers he planted. The shed stood exactly as she had described it, weathered wood painted green with white trim, surrounded by an elaborate flower garden that seemed oddly out of place given Miguel's previously documented lack of interest in gardening. Crime scene technician Janet Morrison began with ground-penetrating radar, systematically scanning the area behind the shed. The machine's readings showed an anomaly approximately 6 feet down, directly beneath a patch of particularly lush roses that seemed to be thriving unusually well in the poor soil. Sarah's stomach clenched as she realized the implications decomposing organic matter would have enriched the soil, causing the flowers to grow more vibrantly. Miguel stood on his back patio, flanked by his attorney, watching the proceedings, with an expression that gradually shifted from confusion to something approaching panic. When the radar confirmed the presence of something large buried beneath the roses, his face went pale, and he gripped the patio railing with white knuckles. "This is insane," he called out, his voice higher than normal. "You're destroying my property based on what? The fantasies of a traumatized child?" Emma is 3 years old. She doesn't understand the difference between dreams and reality. She's been having nightmares since Maria disappeared. But Sarah noticed that Miguel's protest lacked conviction. More telling was his body language. Way he kept glancing toward the shed, the nervous tick in his left eye, the way he unconsciously took a step backward every time the excavation equipment moved closer to the target area. The digging began at 9:30 a.m. Officer David Chun operated the small excavator with surgical precision, removing layers of soil, carefully to preserve any evidence that might be buried with the remains. The scent of disturbed earth filled the air, mixed with the incongruously sweet fragrance of Miguel's prized roses. 3 feet down, they found the first piece of evidence, a fragment of blue fabric that made Sarah's heart skip. Emma had specifically mentioned her mother's pretty blue nightgown with the flowers that came from angels. The fabric was exactly as the child had described it, complete with a small floral pattern that was still visible despite months in the ground. At 4 feet, Officer Chun's shovel struck something that wasn't soil. Sarah held her breath as the team switched to hand tools, carefully brushing away dirt to reveal what appeared to be a section of blanket blue with fuzzy material, just as Emma had whispered to Rex, the blanket that Maria Martinez had used for reading bedtime stories to her daughter had become her shroud. Miguel's composure finally cracked. "Stop," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just stop." His attorney grabbed his arm, warning him not to say anything more. But Miguel seemed to have entered a trance-like state, watching his carefully constructed lie unravel with each shovelful of dirt. The complete remains were uncovered by 11:45 a.m. Maria Martinez, lay exactly where her 3-year-old daughter had said she would be, wrapped in the blue blanket, wearing the nightgown Emma had described. A medical examiner would later confirm blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with being struck by a heavy tool, the shiny, cold thing from the garage that Emma had seen her father use. As the handcuffs clicked around Miguel's wrists, he finally spoke the words that confirmed what everyone already knew. She was going to leave me. She was going to take Emma away from me. I couldn't let that happen. His confession was spontaneous, uncoerced, and completely damning. Sarah looked toward the house where Emma was hopefully playing with Rex, unaware that her whispered secrets had finally brought her mother home and ensured that justice would be served. The little girl's courage in speaking truth to the one being who made her feel safe had solved a case that might otherwise have remained cold forever. Miguel Martinez was charged with first-degree murder, and for the first time in 6 months, Sarah Williams believed that Maria Martinez could finally rest in peace. Wake up to barista-quality coffee with the Brew Master Coffee Maker. With a single touch, brew the perfect cup every morning, customized to your taste. Sleek, easy to use, and designed to make every day a little better. Order now to transform your mornings. The news of Miguel Martinez's arrest spread through the legal community like wildfire, creating ripples that reached far beyond the local courthouse. Within hours of the discovery of Maria's remains, District Attorney Robert Chon found himself at the center of a media storm, unlike anything he had experienced in his 15-year career. The case presented an unprecedented legal challenge. How? To prosecute a murder using testimony from a 3-year-old witness whose only confidant was a therapy dog. Chun stood in his corner office on the 7th floor of the county courthouse, staring out at the crowd of reporters and camera crews that had assembled on the steps below. The case had captured national attention, with legal experts debating the admissibility of Emma's testimony on every major news network. Some called it a breakthrough in child advocacy. Others questioned whether a toddler's account could be reliable enough to convict a man of murder. The prosecutor's biggest challenge wasn't the evidence itself. Miguel's confession at the crime scene had been clearly recorded, and the physical evidence corroborated Emma's account in stunning detail. The challenge was Emma herself. How do you prepare a traumatized 3-year-old to testify in a murder trial? How do you protect her innocence while ensuring that justice is served? Dr. Amanda Foster had become an unexpected celebrity in the psychology community. Her groundbreaking work with Emma and Rex was being studied by child psychologists across the country, but the attention felt overwhelming to the usually private practitioner. She sat in the prosecutor's conference room, surrounded by legal briefs and case studies, trying to chart a course that would protect Emma while still allowing her to tell her story. The traditional approach won't work, Dr. Foster explained to the assembled legal team. Emma's trust is entirely dependent on Rex's presence. Without him, she retreats into selective mutism. We've seen this pattern consistently over the past month of sessions. The dog isn't just a comfort object for her, he's her voice. Defense attorney Linda Rodriguez had taken Miguel's case pro bono, drawn by the complexity of defending a man whose own daughter was the key witness against him. A veteran of high-profile criminal cases, Rodriguez was known for her aggressive tactics and her ability to find reasonable doubt in seemingly airtight prosecutions. But this case was different. It challenged every assumption about witness testimony and family dynamics. Your Honor, Rodriguez argued during a pretrial hearing, we're being asked to accept the fantasies of a severely traumatized child as evidence in a capital murder case. 3-year-olds don't understand the difference between reality and imagination. They're susceptible to suggestion, contamination of memory, and confabulation. A prosecution is building their entire case on conversations between a toddler and a dog, conversations that no adult actually heard firsthand. Judge Margaret Thornton, a stern woman with 30 years on the bench, found herself navigating uncharted legal territory. She had overseen hundreds of cases involving child witnesses, but never one quite like this. The precedent they set could affect how traumatized children testified for decades to come. Emma, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the legal storm swirling around her. She had been placed in the temporary custody of her maternal grandmother, Rosa Martinez, who had fought fiercely for the right to care for her granddaughter. The elderly woman's small apartment had been transformed into a child-friendly environment, complete with toys, picture books, and most importantly, regular visits from Rex. Rosa watched her granddaughter with a mixture of love and heartbreak. The little girl was slowly emerging from her shell, but the trauma ran deep. Emma still woke up screaming from nightmares, still flinched when men approached too quickly, still asked when her real mommy was coming home. The upcoming trial loomed over their fragile household like a dark cloud. Abuela, Emma said one morning over breakfast, using the Spanish word for grandmother that Rosa had taught her. Will Rex come with me to the big room where all the people sit? She had been prepared for court in the gentlest terms possible told, only that she would need to tell important people about the night her mommy went away. The legal team was working around the clock to create accommodations that had never been attempted before. The courtroom would be modified to reduce intimidation fewer. Spectators, dimmed lighting, and child-sized furniture. Emma would testify via closed-circuit television if necessary, but Dr. Foster insisted that Rex's presence was non-negotiable. Officer Jennifer Martinez had become Emma's second favorite person after Rex himself. The kind woman visited regularly, reading stories and playing games, while Rex provided his steady, calming presence. She had also become Emma's bridge to understanding the adult world that was demanding so much of her. Emma, you know how Rex helps other children be brave? Officer Martinez asked during one of their sessions. Well, there are some grown-ups who need to hear your story so they can make sure other little girls stay safe. Rex will be right there with you, just like always. The prosecution team faced another hurdle. Miguel's defense was painting him as a grieving widower driven to desperation by his wife's threats to leave him. They argued that Maria's death was a crime of passion, not premeditated murder, and that Emma's testimony was the product of coaching by overzealous investigators. Dr. Foster had anticipated this line of attack and had meticulously documented every session with Emma. Video recordings showed the child's spontaneous revelations to Rex, proving that her account hadn't been influenced by leading questions or adult suggestion. The consistency of Emma's story, even when told weeks apart, demonstrated its authenticity. The media attention brought both support and criticism. Child advocacy groups rallied behind Emma's right to be heard, while others questioned whether subjecting such a young child to cross-examination was ethical. Experts debated on talk shows, legal scholars wrote opinion pieces, and the nation watched to see how justice would be served. Detective Sarah Williams worked tirelessly to strengthen the case beyond Emma's testimony. She re-interviewed neighbors, analyzed Miguel's financial records for signs of planning, and built a timeline that showed premeditation. The prosecution needed to prove that Miguel hadn't just killed his wife in a moment of rage. He had planned it, executed it, and then tried to cover it up. As the trial date approached, Dr. Foster made a final assessment of Emma's readiness. The little girl had made remarkable progress, but testifying would be the ultimate test of her healing. She's stronger than she knows, Dr. Foster told the legal team. But her strength comes from Rex. They're a team now, and together, they're going to make sure Maria Martinez gets the justice she deserves. The stage was set for a trial that would change everything, not just for Emma and her family, but for the entire legal system's approach to child witnesses and the remarkable animals who helped them find their voice. The morning of Emma's testimony dawned crisp and clear, but the atmosphere inside the county courthouse was electric with tension. By 7 a.m., news vans lined the street for 3 blocks, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal. Flowers. Legal experts, child advocacy groups, and curious citizens had gathered on the courthouse steps, all wanting to witness what many considered the most important child testimony case in recent history. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Margaret Thornton surveyed the modifications that had been made to accommodate the most unusual witness in her 3 decades on the bench. The imposing judicial bench had been lowered, harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced with warmer lighting, and a small chair barely 3 feet tall sat in the witness box. Most remarkably, a special platform had been constructed beside the witness stand where Rex would lie during Emma's testimony, close enough for her to touch, but positioned so he wouldn't obstruct the court's view. District Attorney Robert Chun felt the weight of the moment as he reviewed his notes one final time. In his briefcase lay months of meticulous preparation, expert testimony about child psychology, and documentation of Emma's remarkable journey from traumatized silence to finding her voice. But all of that preparation would mean nothing if Emma couldn't maintain her composure under the pressure of the courtroom. Emma had spent the morning with Dr. Foster and Rex at the victim's advocate office, playing quiet games and doing puzzles, while the adults tried to project calm confidence. The little girl wore her favorite dress, a soft blue one with tiny flowers that Rosa had bought specifically for this day. She didn't fully understand why so many people wanted to hear her story, but she knew that Rex would be with her, and that was enough. "Remember, Emma," Dr. Foster said gently, "you just need to tell the truth, the same way you told Rex. The nice man will ask you questions, and you can take as much time as you need to answer. If you get scared, just look at Rex. He'll be right there." Miguel Martinez sat at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. His daughter, the little girl he had once pushed on swings and read bedtime stories to, was about to testify that he had murdered her mother. Defense attorney Linda Rodriguez had prepared him for this moment, but nothing could truly ready a father for hearing his child's testimony against him. The gallery was unusually quiet as Emma entered the courtroom, her small hand clutched in Officer Jennifer Martinez's larger one. Rex walked calmly beside them, his therapy dog Vest identifying him as an official participant in these proceedings. Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the solemn surroundings, the wood-paneled walls, the American flag, the rows of seats filled with adults watching her every move. Judge Thornton's voice was gentle, but clear, as she addressed the child witness. "Hello, Emma. I'm Judge Thornton, and this is my courtroom. I know this might seem scary, but everyone here just wants to listen to what you have to say. Do you see your special friend Rex? He's going to stay right next to you the whole time." Emma nodded solemnly and approached the witness stand with careful steps. Rex immediately settled onto his designated platform, his warm brown eyes never leaving Emma's face. The moment she was seated, Emma's small hand reached out to rest on Rex's head, drawing strength from his familiar presence. Prosecutor Chun approached with movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. His voice, normally commanding in courtroom arguments, became soft and paternal. "Hi, Emma. I'm Mr. Chun. Can you tell everyone your name and how old you are?" "I'm Emma Martinez," the little girl said, her voice clear but quiet. "I'm 3 years old, but Mommy said I'm almost 4. The mention of her mother in present tense sent a ripple through the courtroom, a reminder of how Emma's young mind was still processing her loss. "Emma, do you remember the night when there was a big storm with thunder and lightning?" Chun continued, his questions carefully scripted to avoid leading the witness while still drawing out her testimony. Emma's grip on Rex's fur tightened slightly. Yes, it was really loud and scary. The sky was angry, and the rain was hitting my window really hard. Can you tell us what you heard that night when you were in your bedroom? For a moment, Emma was silent, her eyes fixed on Rex's gentle face. The dog seemed to sense her hesitation, and shifted slightly closer, his presence a tangible reminder that she was safe. Mommy and Daddy were making loud noises downstairs. Scary loud noises that made my tummy feel funny. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma began to recount the events of that terrible night. Her testimony unfolded with the devastating clarity that only a child's unfiltered honesty could provide. She described her mother's blue nightgown, with flowers from angels, the sound of her parents arguing, and the moment when Daddy hit Mommy with the heavy thing and she fell down and didn't get up anymore. Defense attorney Rodriguez's cross-examination was brief and gentle, recognizing that aggressive questioning of a 3-year-old would only alienate the jury. She focused on Emma's age, asking about her understanding of truth versus make-believe. But Emma's responses were consistent and unwavering. "I know the difference between pretend and real," Emma said with a solemn dignity that only children possess. "Pretend is when I play with my dolls and make up stories. Real is what happened to Mommy. Real is why she can't come home anymore." The most powerful moment came when Prosecutor Chan asked Emma to identify the person who had hurt her mother. Emma's eyes swept the courtroom before settling on the defense table. Her small voice carried across the silent room like a bell tolling. "That's my daddy. He's the one who made Mommy go away forever." Miguel Martinez broke down completely at his daughter's words, his carefully maintained composure crumbling as the full weight of what he had done and what he had put his daughter through finally hit him. His sobs echoed through the courtroom. As Emma continued to pet Rex, seemingly unaware of the emotional devastation her truthful words had caused. The jury, composed of parents and grandparents themselves, watched this brave little girl with tears in their eyes. Emma's testimony lasted only 45 minutes, but in that brief time, she had delivered the most compelling evidence they had ever heard. Her words, spoken with the clarity that only truth possesses, had sealed her father's fate and ensured that her mother's death would not go unpunished. As Emma was gently led from the courtroom, Rex at her side as always, Judge Thornton called for a recess. The legal experts in the gallery knew they had witnessed something historic, a moment that would change how the justice system viewed child witnesses and the remarkable animals who helped them find their voice. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, a remarkably short time for a murder trial. But Emma's testimony had been so compelling, so devastatingly honest, that there was little to debate. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, the packed courtroom fell into absolute silence. "We, the jury, find the defendant Miguel Antonio Martinez guilty of murder in the first degree." The gavel's bang echoed through the courthouse like a thunderclap, marking the end of a legal journey that had captivated the nation and forever changed how the justice system would view child witnesses. Miguel Martinez slumped in his chair, the weight of his daughter's truthful words finally crushing the last vestiges of his denial. His defense attorney placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, but they both knew that Emma's testimony had been unshakable, her account corroborated by every piece of physical evidence they had uncovered. Judge Thornton's sentencing 3 weeks later was swift and decisive. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice carrying the gravity of 30 years on the bench, "you not only took the life of your wife, but you traumatized your own daughter in ways that will affect her for the rest of her life. The only mercy in this case is that Emma had the courage to speak the truth, ensuring that Maria Martinez finally received the justice she deserved." As Miguel was led away in handcuffs, he turned one last time to look at the gallery where Emma sat with her grandmother, Rosa Rex lying calmly at her feet. The little girl didn't meet her father's eyes. She was too busy whispering to Rex about the pretty lady with the black robe who had thanked her for being so brave. Emma's healing had progressed to the point where she could focus on the present, rather than being trapped in the trauma of that terrible night. 6 months after the trial, Emma's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The silent, withdrawn child who had first met Rex had blossomed into a chatty, curious preschooler who filled Rosa's small apartment with laughter and endless questions. She attended Little Sprouts Preschool 3 days a week, where her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, marveled at her resilience and her natural empathy toward other children who seemed sad or scared. Emma has an unusual gift for comforting others, Mrs. Patterson told Rosa during a parent conference. When one of the other children is upset, she immediately goes to them with the same gentleness that I imagine she learned from working with Rex. She's going to grow up to be someone very special. Rex had returned to his regular duties as a therapy dog, but his work with Emma had elevated his status in the law enforcement community. Police departments across the country were requesting information about therapy dog programs, and Rex had become something of a celebrity in child advocacy circles. He appeared at conferences and training seminars, demonstrating the techniques that had helped Emma find her voice. But most importantly, Rex maintained his special bond with Emma. Every Saturday, Officer Jennifer Martinez brought him to Rosa's apartment for what they called Rex Day. Emma would spend hours playing with him, reading him stories and sharing her week's adventures. These visits had become the highlight of both their weeks. Emma's because she could reconnect with her trusted friend, and Rex's because he could see the continued healing of the brave little girl who had changed his life. 2. Rex, guess what? Emma announced during one of their Saturday visits, her face glowing with excitement. I learned to write my name at school. Want to see? She carefully printed E-M-M-I on a piece of paper, her tongue poking out in concentration. Mrs. Patterson says I'm really smart, and Abuela says Mommy would be proud of me. Emma's relationship with her mother's memory had evolved in healthy ways under Dr. Foster's continued guidance, rather than the confused, traumatic associations of the early months. Emma now spoke of her mother with love and the natural sadness of a child who missed someone important. Rosa had filled the apartment with photos of Maria, and Emma would often tell Rex stories about when Mommy was here. The legal ramifications of Emma's case extended far beyond their small community. The Emma Martinez precedent, as legal scholars had begun calling it, established new protocols for child witnesses. In criminal proceedings, courts across the country were implementing therapy dog programs, creating child-friendly courtroom modifications, and training prosecutors in the gentle techniques that had allowed Emma to tell her story. Dr. Foster had written extensively about the case, her research papers becoming required reading in child psychology programs nationwide. She had been invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing the techniques that had helped Emma transition from traumatized silence to confident communication. But she never forgot that at the heart of all the academic acclaim was a little girl who had found the courage to seek justice for her mother. The media attention gradually faded, but Emma's story continued to inspire others. Letters arrived weekly at Rosa's apartment from families dealing with their own tragedies, thanking Emma for showing that even the smallest voices deserved to be heard. Rosa read these letters to Emma, who would solemnly nod and say, "Rex helped me be brave. Maybe Rex can help them too." Detective Sarah Williams had been promoted to sergeant, largely based on her innovative approach to the Martinez case. She kept a photo on her desk of Emma and Rex from the day of the trial, a reminder that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. The case had renewed her faith in the system and her commitment to giving voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. Emma's 5th birthday party was a joyous celebration held in Rose's small backyard, with all her preschool friends, her teacher, Dr. Foster, Officer Martinez, and of course, Rex. As Emma blew out her candles, she made a wish that she whispered. To Rex, I wish all the scared kids can find a friend like you. The case of People versus Miguel Martinez had officially closed, but its impact would be felt for generations. Emma Martinez, with the help of a golden retriever named Rex, had not only brought her mother's killer to justice, but had also opened doors for countless other children who needed someone to listen to their whispered truths. As the sun set on that perfect birthday afternoon, Emma curled up next to Rex on Rose's couch, her small hand resting in his fur as she had done so many times before. Thank you for helping me tell the truth, Rex, she whispered. Mommy can sleep peacefully now, and I'm not scared anymore. Justice had been served, healing had begun, and hope had been restored, all because a brave little girl found her voice through the unconditional love of a therapy dog who understood that sometimes the most important truths are shared in whispers.